Arimado is still over at the KICC speaking about banking safety and everything that is to go with that as PM Live continues.
All right, many thanks, Wallace at Nation Center. And indeed, let me introduce my next guest. Loren Bosch is familiar to many of our viewers. He's been here before, MD of Internet Solutions. Thank you for coming back.
Thanks for having me.
And introducing for the first time Akalah, Chairman of ISACA. What is ISACA? That's a good place to start.
Yeah, ISACA is actually an acronym.
Yes.
Stands for Information Systems Audit and Control Association.
Yes.
But over the period of time, it has evolved to embrace other professionals in assurance, audit, security, risks, and governance.
Yes.
Yes. So we're now known as ISACA, just to embrace the individuals who are in these other specialties that I've just talked about.
And you're a good person to ask. Just the other day, I think it is last week, some people call themselves Rwanda hackers, hacking the websites of 3 banks in Kenya. What did you think of that, and what was really behind that? Can you give us any behind-the-scenes sort of backstory?
Okay, well, I'll not talk specifically about what happened to these banks,
Yes.
but in my mind, there are several drivers that would necessitate
Something like
individuals
that.
hacking into banks or any other institution for that matter. There could be students who are just trying out their new
The hacking skills, yes.
Because we have trainings like ethical hacking, which then probably somebody is trying to try out. And of course, we have those who have the bad intentions, who would want to establish whether they could make something out of this kind of crime. Then again, you never know. There are those other individuals who may just be deliberately trying to bring down the institutions just for purposes of other ill motives. So it's basically behind that.
But what it illustrates, Loren, is that there's a lot of vulnerabilities in this online space where banks are now trying to play, because when you have to move there, your customers are online. But it's so much, you become a lot more vulnerable.
I think that's true in a sense, but it's also important to have some context in terms of what happened in the incidents that you referred to.
Yes.
It was the sort of marketing or advertising elements of the online presences of these banks that was hacked. It was not the personal banking data or information about people's accounts or any security issues like that.
Right, it's good to clarify that.
You know, it's very important to distinguish between, you know, where such kind of information is hosted, and certainly it would not be in a publicly hosted server. So
Yes.
I'm happy to report that we do work very closely with many of the banks in the region, and certainly the CIOs and the CTOs that we meet with are switched on from a security point of view. It's a very big issue. It's a very big box to tick. And would certainly not expose their customer data, you know, on a public web server. So while it's an annoyance, and there are ways to prevent hackers from accessing a marketing or an advertising website and related content, you know, the risk and the threat in this instance was not to individuals and their accounts and the possibility of them losing money.
All right, but how do financial institutions protect themselves in terms of online security and financial transactions that involve an internet element, to make sure that it is still safe and I can trust my information and my money with them?
Yes. Well, I mean, what you'll find is that there's a lot of engagement with security professionals, with institutions like ourselves, just
Yes.
in terms of supporting those objectives from a network architecture point of view, and certainly all the security protocols that are in place. If anyone in Kenya is a customer of a bank that offers online banking, you'll know that the login procedure and even some of the transacting procedures are very tightly controlled, and there are security elements and steps and verification steps throughout that. So, you know, the banks, we know, are doing everything that they can do from a security point of view to protect the information of individuals. And the threat still remains mostly within the individual and how they handle their private information and where they keep their passwords and how they structure their passwords. You know, that is still the single most risky element of such an online transaction.
All right, what are some of the most common threats you're dealing with the financial institutions and your members?
Okay, one of that, probably I'll just go to the fundamentals, is
Yes.
the lack of full appreciation or the inadequate appreciation of risk management and controls. Now, if you do not have the fundamentals right in terms of how you are able to identify these threats in the first place,
Yes.
what it is that you need to do to identify these threats, then that's the beginning of problems. So financial institutions that have embraced risk control and good governance practices are able then to come up with the means and mechanisms to kind of arrest these threats or anticipate the threats in good time so as to take good charge of that. But then that is not to say that you will be totally blocked from these intrusions.
Yes.
What will happen is it's the level of appreciation of the risk management or the embedding of the risk control processes in the organization is what now then will give you some comfort to enable you address these threats. So it's not really that can be foolproof, but it's how you put in place mechanisms to monitor the threats, the attempted intrusions, and what you do about them. That's then what makes a difference.
Loren, what are the common solutions you're providing banks in this space of e-banking and m-commerce and things like that?
Well, I think they have quite a wide range, which depend on the objectives of the individual banks. But really, right from the security point of view, the security is becoming increasingly outsourced, and so it is an outsourced service that we offer many of our banking customers. And the importance, or I suppose the justification for that nowadays, is that security has become a very specialized field, and certainly what you've seen in the papers, there are groups of people who are spending a lot of their own time trying to break and breach security measures. And so on the alternate side of that coin, there are professionals and individuals who are working full-time to maintain that, and to manage also the cost of having those kinds of resources.
Would you say the rate of security breaches is on the rise?
Certainly in the East African context, I think it is.
Yes.
We've spoken in a previous program about the fact that the advent of all the capacity that's now available, making those attacks more frequent, and the ease of access is higher from external sources.
Yes.
But this is a global issue. It has been a global issue for a long time. I think examples like WikiLeaks, who even sort of try and build that into sort of a more structured and almost morals environment are every day. And so there are security companies working constantly to create the barriers to prevent these people. And so on the other side of the coin, there are certainly people who are constantly working on trying to breach those things. And as Roy said earlier, the motives vary.
Yes.
I think one of the examples that was referred to was a vehicle manufacturer's website here, and it was very clearly, I think that breach page was very clearly an advert for security services.
Yes.
So,
it was a show-off in a sense.
I think so I think the frequency will increase of attempt, but certainly the efficiency and the effectiveness of the barriers that are in place will also improve as that happens.
But always sometimes the threats are internal within the financial institutions themselves, and are there mechanisms to be able to detect this and sort of nip it in the bud?
Yeah, well, like I've just mentioned, still going back to the fundamentals, how do you as an institution, even if it is a financial institution, how do you as an institution put in place mechanisms to enable you pick up this kind of threats?
Yes.
So like, again, I've just said, if we have awareness at the appropriate level, so that individuals are able to monitor threats, things like basic things like security of passwords. When individuals are encouraged not to share passwords.
Yes.
So you find instances where probably the technology teams would visit a unit and would mention to the staff, can I have your password? I want to make this kind of fix.
Right.
So if you don't have controls or guidelines in place, minimum standards to guide such kind of activity in the organization, then that's where now you go wrong. So as financial institutions and even as ISACA, what we promote
Yes.
is the adoption of best practice, and we as ISACA have a framework, COVID, which we would like to encourage our members to cascade this to the institutions that they work, so that we have a standard way of dealing with this. The challenge we have probably is mainly actually is a lack of awareness, appreciation.
Yes.
And again, the structures, control standards, which then people need to follow to enable them pick up this kind of threats.
But one of the other thing is, if you were able to track down somebody who was involved in a threat like this, or indeed in a security breach, what does the law say about it? Are there enough mechanisms or penalties for dealing with them?
Well, the law is in place.
Yes.
Okay, I will not profess to be a lawyer to establish the efficacy of the law, but then they are in place. The law is in place, but then the challenges, challenges in understanding interpretation. So there's effort towards fine-tuning this law so that there are no loopholes to enable the perpetrators of these frauds to escape. So we even we as ISACA did provide some input to the CCK request for these are the IT laws in Kenya. And we continue to work together with stakeholders just to fine-tune the laws to enable us be able to put a case through where there is a suspect involved.
All right, and finally, Loren, what are the global best practices in this? What are the trends like? Where are we moving towards?
Well, I think if you start to look at the regulatory environment, it's pushing a lot of the banks into that environment as well. Many of the banks are also being forced just from a standardization point of view to achieve things like PCI compliance,
Right.
which has a very long list of boxes to tick from a security point of view, and a lot of that has to do with policy management and the stuff that Roy was referring to earlier, the internal management of information and where it can go to and where it can't. And we're seeing a lot of focus on those standards being implemented, even if entities are not necessarily going for certified compliance, but to be in line with that compliance. Certainly in the transacting between banks as well, there has to be a standard in place. And we're seeing that the central bank is certainly starting to enforce a lot of those regulations, which have been around for a while, but not necessarily so strongly enforced. So there's very clearly a move in the market and in this industry from the individual players to get themselves to that level if they're not there already. And we're finding that the security levels have improved significantly, at least
Right.
over the last 18 months.
All right, I've just seen a tweet that you're both apparently presenting at the AITEC Mobile Banking Conference.
That's right.
That is what, next month?
It's in the first week of March, yes.
First week of March. I'm looking forward to that. Loren Bosch from Internet Solutions and Roy Akalah, who's also director at KCB. Many thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And it's now time for our top 5.